years of experience in human capital and have spent most of my career in life sciences. I'm based in LA and I've built a vast network of contacts across medical device and biotech. I've completed over 200 engagements across the US, UK, and Europe with a focus on C-suite and NED searches and subsequent team builds for stealth companies, startups, mid-sized organizations, as well as global corporations. Prior to joining ProClinical, I was vice president at Talent International and executive principal at S3's Real Staffing. I started my career as a cytotechnologist with Sonic Healthcare, then became a medical representative with AstraZeneca and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Pre-Med from the University of Technology, Sydney. We're really excited today to have Grace Pan also on the panel. Grace is a partner at Zuber Lawler. Grace focuses on patent litigation, IPRs, deals, and portfolio management, and other intellectual property litigation and deals. She also has experience with freedom to operate, non-infringement, and invalidity opinions. Grace has represented clients in respect to a wide range of technologies, including as relates to semiconductor equipment manufacturing, surveillance cameras, optical discs, Wi-Fi bit for placement, information indexing to facilitate search engines, and electronic commerce. Grace is fluent in both Mandarin Chinese and Japanese and is admitted as a foreign attorney in both China and Japan. In addition to her experience litigating before various US district courts and the Court of Appeals for the federal circuits, she has also litigated before the Tokyo District Court, the Tokyo IP High Court, the Taipei District Court, and the Beijing District People's Court. We're also lucky to be joined by Mark Sanchez. Mark is founder of Contract In-House Counsel and Consultants. Mark is highly experienced in matters involving the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act and related laws. Mark provides counseling on pre-market strategies, including product development, clinical investigations, orphan drug and other designations, pre-market applications, controlled correspondence, dispute resolution and appeals, monograph reviews, GRAS petitions, and marketing and classification review for human and animal products. On post-market strategies, Mark provides counseling on labeling, advertising and promotion, product recalls, good manufacturing practices, and responding to agency enforcement actions. He works with the USDA, where he handles matters encompassing drugs, biologics, and medical foods. Mark is especially well-versed in food and drug enforcement actions. Welcome, Mark. We are lucky also to be joined by Dr. Saad Agarwal, Chief Executive Officer of Cannabis. Saad is an internationally recognized key opinion leader in the clinical use of medicinal cannabis and is regularly invited as a keynote to key industry and pharmaceutical events, including International Cannabinoid-Derived Pharmaceutical Summit, World Cannabis Conference, and the Australian Medical Cannabis Conference. Dr. Agarwal is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Cannabis and one of Australia's largest medical cannabis distribution companies and owner of Ingenu, a contract research company exclusively performing work in cannabinoids and ethogens. He is also the Chief Medical Officer of Incanex Healthcare and a non-executive board director. Dr. Agarwal is a UK-trained medical doctor who did his specialist anaesthesia training in Australia and was admitted to the Fellowship of Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists. He's a global key opinion leader in the pharmaceutical applications of novel cannabinoids and FDA regulatory pathway for registrations of cannabinoid medicines. Welcome, Sub. And last but not least, Jimmy Castillo joins us. Jimmy is a Chief Scientific Officer of Jenny's Rose. Jimmy first came into the cannabis industry in 2008 when he was inspired by his sister, Jennifer Rose Castillo. After Jenny was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2008, Jimmy began his extensive research on the benefits and applications of cannabis. Jimmy formulated for many individuals with ailments, including cancer, Parkinson's, and more. Through this, Jimmy found a knack in understanding the balance and key difference between cannabis compounds and, most importantly, how they impact the body physiologically. Continuing his sister's legacy, Jimmy continues to provide healing to thousands of medical patients and further extensive scientific research surrounding cannabis and its health benefits. His full intention for the future of the plant to not see anyone else suffer the way his sister had. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the panel today. We are going to have a discussion that'll go for about 40 minutes, at which time we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So as we go and you think of any questions, please feel free to type them in the message box. And we'll get to as many as we can at the end. We also are running a poll today to understand a bit more about you and where your interests lie. That might pop up there, so please feel free to fill that in. I think it's just popped up here now. Okay. Okay, so let's dive right in with the questions. So the first one is, what do you think the FDA will do with cannabis capsules? Grace, did you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you very much, Claire. And actually, I just want to mention, it's my fault I did not put it in my bio. I also have done a lot of Hatch-Waxman litigation, so I don't want people to think I don't have any experience with FDA-related matters. It's just I was trained more traditionally as an FDA lawyer. With regard to FDA and what they will be doing with cannabis capsules, FDA has been very careful in terms of approving anything that's cannabis related. And we think FDA, so far they actually have approved 3 drugs, which is Marinol, Cesanet, and Epidiolex. And, Epidiolex, I think people probably know that was approved in 2020 for epilepsy. And that's actually something that can be used for patients as young as 1. And that's for treating genetically inherited epilepsy disease. And the other 2 actually were used for chemo-related anti-nausea medication. So we think in terms of capsules, maybe there could be orally taken medicine or maybe suppository. FDA actually has come up with a process for approving cannabis-related drugs. And what they do is first the sponsor has to obtain a pre-IND. It's not that different from your regular NDA application. So you first have to, sponsor has to obtain a pre-IND number through CDER review division in order to request a pre-IND meeting. And after that, the sponsor will provide all the applicable chemistry, which is not that different from NDA, manufacturing and controls, and any botanical raw materials, which that's a little different. Information in the IND for review by the FDA, including the hemp cultivars, which that is a little different from your typical NDA application. Then if the selected hemp manufacturer holds a drug master file, which is DMF, the sponsor must also obtain a letter of authorization to reference the CMC and the VRM information. Alternatively, an IND submission would need to contain all necessary CMC and data characterizing their study drugs and ensure that it is safe for use in human. Now, the sponsor after that will need to send a copy of this IND and clinical protocol, including letter of authorization to FDA. And once that is all done, FDA will have time to review the submitted IND. Once that is done, you cannot start the clinical trial until 30 days, and this is very important, 30 days after you have 30 calendar days after you have submitted the IND, unless FDA notify you and say you can start your clinical trial earlier. And that's a very interesting distinction, that they want you to wait 30 days. And then you can start your approval process and you can start your clinical trial. And yeah, Mark, do you have something to add to this?
The only thing I would add is the focus maybe on capsules, but the dosage form, which capsule is one of, could be different dosage form. It could be a nebulizer, it could be a cream. And really the driving force won't be as much the dosage form as it would be the indication. So if it's for epilepsy, for some treatment of pain or something else, that's really going to be the driving force, is the indication for use. The other thing I would add, capsules could include dietary supplements, right? Encapsulation, like a gel cap, which is something we could imagine occurring if cannabis is legalized, because dietary supplements in the United States are allowed to make structure function claims. So like promotes kidney health, promotes a healthy immune system, which are a step below medical claims, but are still permissible to make and have a lower regulatory burden to enter the market. So it could be something to envision as well, having a dietary supplement that's encapsulated with cannabis in the future.
I actually have a question. So, what about the preclusion issues? Like, I think in the statute it says if it's a medicine first, then you cannot use it as a dietary. You will not be able to use it as a dietary supplement.
Yeah, we've seen the IND preclusion raised a lot for CBD, and Epidiolex has been sort of the barrier for legal CBD use, in particular CBD isolate use as dietary supplements. Yes. So if we kind of forecast to the future where cannabis is legalized by Congress, and Congress is not careful in the language they use to legalize, and they don't address that preclusion question, there is sort of the issue of whether Marinol or some of these other cannabis products would bar the use in foods as dietary supplements. So I think it's part of why it's so important for the legalization process to be carefully crafted with some of the barriers we know already existing in the FDA landscape.
Thanks so much for that, Mark, and thanks, Grace. Can you talk about the packaging and how that impacts being accepted by the FDA and FTC? Jimmy, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here. Right now we have a lot of mature states that are regulating cannabis and cannabis packaging. And I think that as we continue to evolve, we're going to see consistency in what states are already looking for as far as child-resistant packaging, not gearing it towards children and having cartoons on the packaging. But moreover, I think that, if it's going to be accepted by the FDA, we need to be very careful on the intended use of our products and making those claims until we get to a place where we have, clinical research and can show that, cannabis does X, Y, and Z before as a company starts marketing as it to help with migraines or to cure epilepsy and things like that. I think it's going to be really important as far as getting the FDA to allow us in packaging.
Thanks, Jimmy. And if anyone has anything else to add, please just jump right in. What are the fastest FDA pathways to new drug approval, and what are the lowest hanging fruits? Sud, did you want to talk about this?
Sure. Okay. First of all, yes, thank you for having me on this presentation. And to answer your question, there's pretty much three principal pathways to get a drug approval with the FDA. Most people are familiar with the 505(b)(1) NDA, which is your standard front of house pathway, where you're essentially taking a new clinical or a new chemical entity and taking it throughout all the different stages, preclinical, opening an IND, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, to formal submission. And then also many people are familiar with what's typically the shortest pathway, which is a 505J ANDA, which is the generic pathway. We're essentially saying you've got a drug which is fully bioequivalent to an existing innovative product. And typically you do a food effect study or some kind of quick bioequivalent study to demonstrate that it's an otherwise biosimilar drug where you should get the same clinical effect. And that's a very, very short pathway. Now, the third pathway that many people are familiar with and has sort of increased in popularity over the last 10 years is the 505(b)(2) new drug approval process. And that's kind of a hybrid process between a standard 505(b)(1) and an ANDA process. We're essentially taking an existing approved product, and you're saying that we are bridging or doing a PK bridge to an existing approved product by demonstrating bioavailability and bioequivalence to that product with an identical, or usually an almost identical API to the reference listed drug that you're bridging to. So I guess applying the relevance to the cannabinoid world, as Grace said right at the beginning, there's only a few approved cannabinoids. There's Marinol, which is a synthetic analog of THC. There's Epidiolex, which is essentially a botanically sourced CBD product. There's Sesamet, which doesn't really have too much of a market in the US, probably a bigger market in Canada, which is another analog of THC. And finally, there's a liquid formulation, which was a 505(b)(2) bridge to Marinol called Syndros. And that's a liquid formulation of THC. So you've only really got 4 products that are post-approval that you can use as one of your reference listed drugs. So it's pretty finite what you can do there. I would say the lowest hanging fruit today is probably one of 2 options. People taking either Marinol's existing label claim, which is chemotherapy-associated nausea and vomiting, or weight loss in HIV and AIDS. People taking that existing claim and performing a PK bridge to that under 505(b)(2, that would probably be a very low-hanging fruit. And typically, you'd be able to get that process approved within under a 2-year period. Or alternatively, with the FDA exclusivity on Epidiolex rapidly coming to an end. So bearing in mind that was a new chemical entity that was approved in 2018. So they got a 7-year data exclusivity under the FDA Orphan Program. So by 2025, that exclusivity should be over. So with a relatively short lifetime remaining, I would imagine there'd be a number of people already creating generics to that or 505(b)(2) bridges to that with a view to try and compete in that market soon. So they're probably the 2 lowest hanging fruits, both 505(b)(2s).
That's extremely helpful. Thanks for going into such detail on that, Sud. Can you talk about age groups and dosing and how to protect patients' use of medication? Mark, did you want to talk to us about this?
Yeah, sure. So initially what I would say is the mandate of the FDA is public safety and safety of patients. And so that's the operating procedure of the FDA. And anytime a sponsor comes forward with an IND or one of the pathways that Sud just mentioned with an application, the FDA is scrutinizing it for safety, both in terms of the patient population, contraindications, dosage form, dosage amount. And so what I would say is based on that posture the FDA is going to have, when you have a drug product come forward, it's the burden of the sponsor, the applicant, in most cases the manufacturer, to demonstrate why it is safe, why it's safe for the particular indications that they've developed, for the patient population that's associated with that indication, and the dosage and dosage form that they have. So it really becomes a burden on the sponsor to do that. And something you would do either through literature, through the bridging that Sud mentioned to these existing products, or through additional clinical study to show the safety and efficacy. Grace, did you want to add anything else?
No, actually, you said exactly what I wanted to say. And, a big part probably also is, the result of the clinical trial, especially phase 3 clinical trial, what the result is and how, the safety data shows.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. I know something we were talking about offline was, protecting a patient's supply of the formulation. And I know there have been incidences of other people taking the medication that's meant for someone else. Did anyone have any experience with that or want to touch on that and how that could be prevented?
Go ahead, Grace.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I sometimes people take it off label or not for the right indication. One of the famous one is Vyvanse ADHD drugs that because that in of itself is the main ingredient is speed. So it's a great diet drug, and we're feeding children speed really, but it's also it give you a lot of energy and it actually suppress your desire to eat. So a lot of people actually parents actually end up taking it as a diet pill. So it's possible that people, it's very difficult, I think, to prevent people from making off-label use on their own, not because the doctor told them to, but because people accidentally found out. Viagra is another example that they found out. It's not a great heart medication, but it has different purpose, which they discovered in operating room. When they were operating on the patient, and some reaction happened, and so they found out, wow, it's good for something else. It's not good for heart medication. So I think that's but I think but I'll go back to what Mark said. I think FDA will find a way to regulate it, and maybe if people can go ahead and file for a different different use, different off-label use, that would be helpful. Maybe FDA can encourage that instead of saying no, you're not allowed to use this, and basically put an iron fist on it and say don't do that. Maybe encourage and say, okay, you can file for off-label use or different indication that actually may discourage people from using something illegally, and protect that. And another thing is that I noticed, because I was born in Japan, so I noticed that sometimes different medication work with different people, and Asians have different their body is different, a little different than Westerners. And I know that especially for medication used in Japan for phase 3 clinical trial, if it's used for Japanese people, phase 3 clinical trial need to be done to Japanese people, because they're a little smaller, and their body constituents is a little different because they're on different diets. So I think that's also something to kind of take into account. Sometimes when they take in Western medicine, their side effects is a little bit magnified, or it's less effective than medication that's specifically geared towards Asians. So that's another consideration that people might want to think about. So if you're depends on who your population, who your ultimate patients are, who you want to distribute this medication to. That's something you might want to think about where you want to do your phase 3 clinical trial.
Thank you so much. There's such interesting points, Grace. Is addiction something that you see as a problem in your patients or clients, Jimmy?
I've worked with thousands of people over the last decade, and it's very interesting. I came into the cannabis space very skeptic, of what cannabis can do. Growing up, we've seen cannabis and people smoking it, and it gets you high, and it makes you eat, makes you sleep, and gives you the munchies, right? When my sister was going through cancer, this was something that I found appealing, right? But after she passed and I started working with people, my grandma, she was in hospice and, dying of cancer on opiates and stuff like that. And when I offered her a cannabis chocolate bar, she asked me if she was going to become addicted to it. And, first rational thought was, no, grandma, this is something that's going to help you at the end of your life, right? But afterwards, it was something that stuck with me. So I started paying attention to how cannabis works in our body. And of course, anybody can become addicted to anything, right? We get addicted to food and stuff like that. And much more research needs to be done on, the physiological and the psychological effects of addiction and cannabis. But what I've seen was very interesting is that, the way cannabinoids work in the body is it's a fat, it's a lipid, right? And it bonds to our fatty tissue. And so when someone for 30 days, and so when someone stops using cannabis, they don't go through the same withdrawals that we observe in alcohol dependency or street drugs or things like that. And also what I've also observed over the last 10 years is that cannabis actually can be a bridge to help people that are addicted to some things get off of them. Myself, I stopped drinking alcohol, because I was using alcohol to manage my pain, to sleep. I was in a motorcycle accident. And instead, I'm able to use cannabis to get all of these and be able to stop whenever I want.
Thanks, Jimmy. Such a good point to make and to get clarity on it. I know you mentioned also offline, sort of separating the two elements, like the therapeutic element from the element that's more addictive.
Yes, absolutely.
What dosage formats have the FDA ever approved, and is there any inhaled drugs in the pipeline with the FDA seeking approval, Sud?
Yeah, very good point, Claire. So as I mentioned when I first spoke, there's 4 currently approved FDA cannabinoids, and 2 of them are in the liquid format, and 2 of them are capsules. So they're all oral dose formats at the moment. Having said that, there's quite a lot of inhaled products now that have open INDs with the FDA, undergoing some form of clinical trial and at various stages throughout the clinical trial process. In general, all inhaled cannabinoids could be administered, I guess, from a theoretical perspective, as probably one of 5 different inhaled formats. You could have a pressurized metered dose inhaler, a dry powder inhaler, a soft mist inhaler, or you could have some kind of heated vapor pen, some kind of standard vape pen, or alternatively, you could have a heat not burn, technically a non-combustible vape pen, which is like a simple draw over type vaporizer. So those are your 5 basic inhaled formats. From my personal engagements with the FDA, working in a CRO and advising a number of companies on these, it seems like the FDA has a particularly negative stance towards the combustible technology. I think there is significant concern, and perhaps rightly so, that when you heat cannabinoids, there is a whole series of molecules that emerge which have not been characterized, and not much is known about the toxicology and the safety and tolerability of those metabolites. So that's perhaps one area of concern. And so it seems that the room temperature or the non-combustible technology is more likely to be, I guess, is more likely to be approved by the agency. So if we then condense it down, out of the 3 major formats that we've got, pressurized metered dose inhaler, dry powder inhaler versus soft mist inhaler, the challenge always becomes which will allow us to deliver the right amount of API faithfully across the blood gas membrane into the lung. And thinking about it at the moment, it may be that all 3 are deficient, and there probably isn't anybody yet who's devised a convincing way of getting a sufficient enough dose of CBD or THC across the blood gas membrane. So I think it's a case of watching this space, but my thinking would be that a pressurized metered dose inhaler, and there's a number of open INDs investigating those as a potential clinical treatment for a whole swathe of different indications. I would imagine one of them would be the first across the finish line with a marketing authorization.
Pressurized metered dose. Yeah. Thank you so much, Stud. That's so informative. What are the pros and cons of incorporating cannabis into medical treatments? Grace?
Thank you, Claire. I think I'll start with cons because that is still a controlled substance in some states. And because of that, you got DEA involved. First of all, that, you can really only do interstate. You can transport that interstate. So this particular product cannot be crossing state lines. So if you have a medicinal package, and it's combined with other medicine, and you need to treat a patient, you cannot ship across state line. That's going to be a problem. So if you got a patient in, say, New York, and it's going into a state, your patient is in a state that marijuana has not been legalized, you cannot ship this product into that state. And you cannot use any postal service, anything at all. You cannot use anything that's federally regulated. That's illegal, and DEA will be involved, and so that is a very big con. And in terms of pros, I have yet to, unless you OD and operate heavy machinery, driving a car or using a forklift or what have you, I don't think people really have like died from being poisoned to death from cannabis. So that's probably one of the biggest pros. Mark, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're right about the pros. It's a botanical ingredient for the most part, unless there's some of these synthetic compounds that are made from it. So we have a long history of use, a long study of use of cannabis that we can draw from for these applications. In addition to the regulatory burden of involving the DEA, I think what Seth talked about in terms of the combustible speaks to cannabis more broadly, which within the agency, there may be some stigmatization or bias in some parts to cannabis and how it works in the body, not just for combustible, but for other applications. And so I think you kind of have to overcome some of those hurdles as well to convince the FDA that it's not addictive, non-habit forming, that the psychoactive portions are not as detrimental as they could be in terms of other side effects for other medications. So I think, overall, it just is a unique ingredient that has more history and cultural history than some other active pharmaceuticals may have.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Grace. I know, Grace, you mentioned borders and state borders, and even I know you told me mentions like where your CRO is and where your manufacturing operation is, and all of those things are needing to be much closer to home. Can you talk about how taste impacts patient adherence, Jimmy?
Yeah, absolutely. Taste has two important factors to it. One of them is when we're choosing a delivery method and formulating. I think the key to what I found finding the most therapeutic dose in cannabis is microdosing and titrating and finding out where each individual's personal need is for the use of cannabis. If you have something that doesn't taste well, or for instance, some of the gummies on the market taste like Robitussin because they're trying to mask the taste. The second thing, which becomes a complication with the FDA and working with the FDA, is the entourage effect, right? There's so many chemical compounds in the cannabis plant, and taste, the entourage effect, flavonoids, terpenoids, work synergistically with the cannabinoids to achieve a desired goal. And so, it's important when formulating that we not burn those off, and that we utilize those tastes. Like for instance, cannabis has terpenes in them from like say black pepper and lemon and mango and lavender, right? And if you think about that, doesn't sound like something would be appealing to eat, but magically all together, they, one, have this specific taste, and two, have this function inside our body that help the cannabinoids talk to the receptors. So going forward, I think it's going to be important to formulate things naturally and synergistically around those terpene profiles and those flavor profiles. And maybe Seth could speak on that a little bit more too.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make there, Jimmy. So this is, I guess, where there's a conventional FDA program that you could go down, where you've got a single API. It's a very well characterized drug substance. You've got a very well characterized drug product. You filled out your M3 and you've got your CMC very, very clean, cut and dry, and you make a standard submission. I guess all that gets thrown on its head when you suddenly say, hey, we've got a plant, and the plant's got multiple different APIs. We don't know what they are. And then depending on how the plant is grown and depending on how the plant is prepared, there could be natural variations that occur. So the agency has given a botanical drug development guidance document, and and it's very helpful for defining it. And it does create it does create quite a generous bandwidth for being able to push a botanical drug product through. But we probably have to say that there's only ever been 2 botanical drug products ever approved by the agency in history. So I would say the probability of going down the conventional road where you've got a single API, a well-defined drug substance, a very clean-cut module 3 is a much more well-trodden path. So if you were a gambling person and you were taking a whole plant product and you've got multiple terpenes and you've got multiple cannabinoids all working in this kind of chemical soup together, that's pretty hard. That's a pretty hard product to push through the regulatory pathway. So it's I think it would be look, it's a brave man who tries to push that through, but it's not to say that it's impossible.
Thanks, Sud. And then continuing on that, Sud, what cannabinoids other than CBD and THC have drug candidates seeking approval with the FDA?
Yeah, okay. So as we mentioned right at the start, of the 4 products approved by the agency in history, Epidiolex is a pure play botanical CBD. Marinol is essentially a synthetic form of THC. Nabilone is an analog. It's a new chemical entity, but it's an analog of THC. And then there was Syndros, which is a liquid formulation of dronabinol, which was a 505(b)(2) bridge to Marinol. So that's what's been approved. Now, in terms of what's in the pipeline, there's quite a lot of CBD products that have got open INDs going for a whole swathe of different indications today. There is a whole bunch of THC-based products which are using the 505(b)(2) route to go for a different indication to what's been approved for Marinol and Syndros, but still utilizing the same data that they're bridging to the existing reference listed drug to utilize some of their data. So that exists. And I guess we've got a whole bunch of combination drugs as well now. So the agency has a very clear guidance on the combination rule, where you've got 2 separate APIs being used in a fixed dose combination, where you have to demonstrate the purpose of both of those different active ingredients. And it could be that they work synergistically to enhance efficacy, or it may be that one reduces the side effect profile, allowing the other API to operate more efficiently. So there is some very clear guidance, and I think there will be a whole bunch of combination cannabinoids approved in the next 5 to 10 years. But interestingly, some of the minor cannabinoids these days appear to be getting a bit of prominence. And I'm probably going to say there's also some synthetic cannabinoids that do not occur naturally in the plant. And then there's some of the minor cannabinoids in the plant. So these are phytocannabinoids that occur that have been basically transferred to a synthetic model. So I guess many things that I'm collaborating with it through the CRO are not public knowledge. But I guess what is public knowledge, and very public knowledge, is GW Pharma, now Jazz Pharmaceuticals CBDV program. So that's a naturally occurring phytocannabinoid. They've isolated that and they built that out as a platform for future approval of many, many new drugs. And it'll be very exciting to see, A, whether those meet the efficacy endpoints, and B, whether they can mass produce such a minor cannabinoid in a cost-effective manner. And I think that applies to all the other cannabinoids too.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sud. And then the last question that we have is, can you talk about how federal law in some states is creating hurdles in R&D and distribution? Jimmy, did you want to start us off on this?
Yeah, sure. And excuse me. Grace touched on this a little bit earlier about it being a controlled one substance and the DEA. And, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for companies that are looking to, have clinical research done and R&D and determining different molecules in the plant. If you're in California and you're manufacturing in California and the research facility is back east, you can't ship it there. You would have to start from scratch in that state to get the research done. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we have right now is access to these analytical labs in our jurisdictions, and also finding research or finding finances, to get these CROs researched and stuff like that. Most people are looking at cannabis right now on the recreational side, and they understand the hurdles that we have to get access to these labs. So they're less likely to bring in the money that we need to to get this research done. Grace, do you want to?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, Claire. My understanding is cannabis plant is also a plan that's constantly evolving. So in order to get some consistency, what you are growing because of the climate and the humidity, a lot of various things, soil, they're all different, varying from state to state. So if you're not able to ship between states, interstate, you are not able to get any consistency in terms of what you're doing with your R&D, and your quality control is going to be an issue in terms of when you're doing research and trying to come up with a product that is consistent in terms of what you're trying to do for medicinal purposes. And if you're not able to ship, you're not going to be able to do the comparison in terms of doing the research you need to do to get the proper data and to even do the clinical trial, I think. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You should be able to ship samples. We like a lot of time, with very critically ill patient. You ship their tissue samples, blood samples. If they're really sick, the patients cannot travel anymore. You ship their samples all over the country, sometimes even internationally, to do analysis, but you can't even do that.
Right.
And if a certain company may have a particular strand that will be helpful to the patient, you cannot even ship them to the patients, and the patients will have to travel to that particular site, which sometimes is not possible because most of these patients that need these medicine is actually pretty critically ill patients, usually at end stage patients, and that makes it very difficult until federal government turn around and understand the importance, and DEA kind of play ball. I think it's going to be, but it's not going to be very easy to do. And I understand 37 states have already legalized medicinal use, and I think 18 states have already legalized recreational use. So I think we're getting there, but federal government need to get on board, as well as DEA.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. That was brilliant and such good and in-depth information. We really appreciate the insight and the professionalism and all of your experience. We're going to jump to questions. The first one is, will the FDA allow for CBD/THC vapes? And how about vapes with terpenes in brackets, cannabis and non-cannabis derived?
So I can jump on that for the vape stuff. Currently, and it's changing as we speak, the current definition for vape is for tobacco products. And tobacco products initially in 2016 was defined as the tobacco plant. The reason it's changing as we speak is the omnibus spending bill that's passing Congress, just passed the House last night, will pass the Senate this weekend, is changing the definition to synthetic nicotine as well. So currently, CBD, THC is still outside that definition, but it shows that Congress is evolving the definition of what constitutes a vape product. So the current definition will be limited to tobacco in any form, and that leaves CBD and vape out. But again, with THC, you're limited to interstate commerce anyway. You can't ship that between states. It would be a state regulated product in the first place. And CBD is more of a difficult question to answer because of some states have regulation that relates to it, some don't. And so it makes it difficult to have a single label, it makes it difficult to have a single shipping distribution plan. So on the vape side, it's fairly complex when it comes to those questions.
Thanks, Mark. That's really helpful. Another question that came in is, on the capsules question, do you see the FDA allowing THC as a dietary supplement?
I can start with that. THC is Delta 8, so has not been approved, and actually it's listed as a safe product by FDA. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. Maybe other people can jump in on that discussion. At least FDA is putting it on Delta 8. So
what I would add is, as long as there's a scheduled substance, then remain scheduled, like Delta 9 and THC, and the ambiguity of Delta 8, FDA will not touch that. And to Sud's point earlier about the cannabinoid research that's going on, there's a closing window for cannabinoids other than THC to be used in dietary supplements that are not currently being studied in INDs. And that's the preclusion provision that we mentioned before. So if it's scheduled, it's not going to be touched with a 10-foot pole by the FDA. If it's not scheduled, like some of these other cannabinoids that naturally occur in the hemp plant, there's an ability to have those in foods and dietary supplements if they have not been studied as drugs. And so that's why it's so important. If you think you're going to have a cannabinoid like CBG or something used in a product, to use it and get it on the market sooner rather than later, because this is such an active area of research.
Thanks, Mark. And then we have, what about products like RSO? Will the FDA disallow sale as a capsule or injectable until it's approved as a drug per se?
I mean, in general, any injectable drug, anything injected into the body is a drug product. There's always an argument to say if it's orally consumed and ingested through the stomach, it's a food or a dietary supplement, and you can try and wiggle around saying it's not actually an active pharmaceutical ingredient and it's actually making appropriate claims. So there may be some way to try and maneuver there, but when it comes to injections into the body, that is and can only be a drug product, and that requires approval. So that's pretty hard to avoid.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for jumping in on that. Then we've got, what about mechanistic research? Cannabis is a drug looking for a disease, question mark. Mechanistic research. I don't know if anyone wants to dive in on that one. Maybe we can circle back. We have this one. Are those who are most efficient with clinical trials finding absorption more successful using isolated molecules or full spectrum? And then it extends, or will FDA lean towards synthetics for approval?
Perhaps answer that, Claire. My experience with the agency is that they're kind of open to both synthetic APIs as well as botanically sourced APIs. Maybe from a drug development pathway and cost, the synthetic pathway is a little cheaper because your batch to batch consistency and your CMC and your scale up is much easier to predict. And also, perhaps if the botanical way, the cost of the API, the production cost of it is probably a little cheaper. So there's sort of good and bad with both pathways from a drug development perspective. I think from a pure approval perspective, the synthetic product is much easier to define, and defining your impurities and defining how you're going to do your scale-up manufacturing are very key parts of one of your modules, your module 3. So I think that might answer your question.
Thanks so much, Sud. And then we have, it looks like, how have THC drugs been approved given the federal status?
I would have thought to answer that question, Claire, maybe there's a little bit of confusion between the standard FDA approval process where the 2 or the 3 THC style drugs that have been approved have gone through a full FDA approval process. So they've actually performed clinical trials and preclinical studies to confirm the safety and the efficacy of the products. So perhaps quite different to selling them via the state-based medical marijuana programs, which are not federally approved.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Sud, for that. Are there any other questions? Is there anything else people were wondering, wanted clarification on? If there is, please do just type them in the box. Oh, yeah, we do have one for Sud. Can you also address approvals through the TGA versus FDA?
Okay, yes. Yeah, myself and yourself, Claire, being Aussies, this will be a topic that's familiar to us. Yeah, the TGA perhaps is quite different to the FDA, because the FDA gives pre-development guidance, which is quite, and they give very thorough and excellent pre-development guidance. So the whole concept of a Type B or a pre-IND meeting is, it's gold for a drug developer. You can ask a series of questions. You can submit your synopsis or protocol for feedback, and you can even qualify whether your endpoints and the magnitude of the effect size that you're going to demonstrate is going to be acceptable to the agency prior to spending millions of dollars in a clinical trial. So that's very good. With the TGA, you don't get that privilege. They don't give you any guidance beforehand, and it's up to you to complete your clinical trial work and then seek a yes/no response from them to say, well, okay, I've done my study. These were my outcomes that I discovered. Is this acceptable to the TGA to get my drug product approved? So there's some sort of challenges, and so historically, most drug developers have used the FDA as the primary source to get their product approved, because you get very meaningful feedback along the way, and you can stop after every clinical trial and seek further approval and guidance. And then once they've got FDA approval, most of the global regulatory bodies have some form of accelerated pathway where you can submit a dossier that's already got regulatory approval from a major regulatory body like the FDA to get a slightly quicker approval process in another global jurisdiction.
Oh, that's great to know. Yeah, thanks so much, Sad, for that. So if there are no more questions, I want to welcome everyone on the video today, and those who'll be watching later, to please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with the panelists on LinkedIn. It's great to form a community and continue the discussion. They may not be able to respond to everybody, but please don't hesitate to connect and to connect with myself. Zuba Lawler does look after a lot of legal clients legally for this area of medicinal cannabis. ProClinical does a lot of staffing and executive search for the space. And yeah, we're all very much looking forward to continuing the discussion. So thank you for joining us today. And yeah, thank you to all our panelists.
Thank you so